Okay. We're going to start off with the big question of what do we call this? Is it called the Static Chronicles? Is it called the Static Site Happy Hour? Is it called Fun with Static Sites with Zach and Mike?
Yeah, I feel like we have some good options. There's no.
Yeah, you can't lose.
Yeah, I mean, all of them are good. I think originally I wanted to go with Static Web Development Happy Hour. Seems
Yeah.
like a nice, jovial, welcoming space. But yeah, Static Chronicles has like some gravitas to it.
Mm.
So I'm on board with either. We can just flip flop back and forth,
Yeah.
back and
And
forth between them.
the first time someone talks back to us and says the name, that locks it in.
Yeah, surely a consensus of one will be reached.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Nice.
great. Yeah, I guess I wanted to just start out. I think this one's going to be pretty casual this week, but I wanted to start out maybe with a review of some updates that happened from our previous episodes. So I think a couple episodes back, we sort of made this 11 plugin to do live transcripts and show transcripts content in your blog posts to make it searchable. And yeah, I guess I wrote a blog post about that to kind of describe the approach and go through the different steps that people can do to reproduce it. There's a couple of web components in here that folks can use too. But I think importantly, the cool update that happened is that we made some changes to Paul Irish's like YouTube embed on that stream, and we pull requested them, and that was merged over the weekend and released. So yeah, the stream
It's making
has
waves, the stream.
contributed to this web component that I think is just like, I don't know, it's a pretty popular web component. I use it all over the place. And so yeah, it's kind of cool to make a contribution to another project. So I think shout out to Ricky maybe for originally suggesting that we contribute those fixes back, and yeah, we did that and it happened. And code is live, so you can use those changes in production right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, you don't need to fork and have your own version anymore. You just
Yeah.
use.
Yeah, on my side I was sort of in these examples I have linked up at the top. I was using that forked version, and yeah, I was able to move it back yesterday to the official plugins, and I'll keep getting updates from them, and I won't have to maintain that.
Yeah,
Which
that's
is the
awesome.
beauty of open source, right? So yeah, great news there. And I think I had a couple of other topics to go over, and maybe it might be worth. I'll just list them out to you and see which one you want to go first. I think I kind of have 3 different segments to the show today.
Yeah, we need some like transition and banners for
Yeah,
the
we do.
segments. Like,
We need I'll just make a post-it note
jingle.
and put it on the screen. I'm calling this the Core Web Vitals INP
Yeah.
apocalypse. The big change that's happening in Core Web Vitals next week on March 12th. Yeah, things are changing a lot. And we can kind of go through those changes and what they mean for your site and your Google page rank and all of those things, and web performance generally. I also wanted to talk about the future of Jamstack Panel that happened yesterday. I think there was a lot of good discussion yesterday. I think it went amazingly, and yeah, I would be happy to discuss that. I think that there's a lot of stuff that came out of it. So yeah, I think that'd be a good discussion topic. And then the third one I wanted to go through is just maybe just be a super fan of some web components, do a web components roundup, go through a couple of web components that I'm a big fan of that I personally haven't written, not just talking about stuff that I made. But yeah, some community web components and highlight some work that other folks are doing.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
So,
Let's do it in order. I feel like your order was being on.
oh, great. So we'll start with maybe the big Core Web Vitals change. Is that the one I talked about first?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, next week, March 12th, Google
Mark your
is sort of
calendars.
shipping. Yeah, exactly. Google is shipping this big change to their Core Web Vitals system, and yeah, I think it's going to change a lot about web performance generally. I think the big change that people are talking about mostly is sort of the replacement of first input delay with this new metric, interaction to next paint. And yeah, there's been quite a few blog posts written about this, and yeah, I think it's a somewhat controversial change, just because of the performance implications of the output of it. Um, it's yeah, so maybe it's worth just going through what the difference is between
Yeah.
these two metrics. First input delay is kind of the it's a measurement of the delay between when a user first tries to interact with the page, uh, and it only measures the first one. And that's perhaps the biggest difference between FID and INP, is that INP it measures all of the interactions on your page, and there's a bit more subtlety that goes into it, but it basically picks the biggest one, and that it's more of a worst case metric than a first case metric.
Mm.
Um, And so, yeah, it's going to give, I think, maybe a longer uh, or a bigger picture into web performance and how the web performance of your pages sort of post page load, because a lot of these web performance metrics are just like initial page load and getting stuff on the screen. Um, and yeah, I think it's a big change, right? Because a lot of sort of approaches that folks took previously to get a good FID rating uh, will not work with this new metric because it's worst case. You can't just lazy load everything. um, yeah, and you need to be, I guess, smarter about how you're sort of lazy loading your JavaScript, and your event handlers, I think, will play a big part in your web performance. And so the big thing, I think, that the big repercussion from this change is that these core web vitals inform your are an input to your PageRank on Google.
Mm.
So that's kind of a big deal. And you can see in this Mastodon post I put up, I just sort of showed some existing measurements here, because I think this will sort of affect single page applications and JavaScript heavy applications a lot. You can see Next.js has had a green FID score, but has a yellow interaction to next paint score, and the same with React, and Vercel went from yellow to red. So yeah, I think it's definitely making waves, and a lot of folks are talking about it.
Yeah.
Um,
That's really the real power behind Core Web Vitals is it shifts the web towards a certain towards like optimizing around certain metrics, which I think has had a massive impact on the web, like for the good. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
what do you see? What do you think this change is going to do? Like, what do you think? Vercel's in red. Like, how are they going to address this problem, or will they address it?
I mean, I think it's inevitable that they're going to have to look at this, because you don't want your core web vitals to be in the red. And I think Vercel sort of positioned themselves as being a performance focused company.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I sort of remember back to the original introduction of, they have their like own analytics product that they offer. Um, and in my mind, there was a lot of controversy when that was introduced originally, because it really, to me, I felt like they were trying to control the narrative around Next.js's web performance. because they really, really focused on field data, and a lot of the uh, metrics that they show in their dashboard and their analytics are, they call it RUM performance, which is real user measurement performance. So it's field data from actual devices in the wild. All of that stuff is sort of reported from real user data. And the other sort of half of that coin is the other side of the coin is lab data. So your Lighthouse scores, I think, is the other big part of that. And so I think Next.js sites generally have not had great Lighthouse scores, and you can kind of see that in a lot of the Astro social media posts that they put out, really highlighting the drawbacks of Next.js based sites in terms of web performance. And I really do think that their analytics, they built like an entire analytics product to make people care more about field data than lab data. And to me, it felt like they were hiding lab data. You need both, right? Because if you're only relying on Lighthouse scores and lab data, that doesn't give you the full picture of what actual users are interacting with on your site. And if you're only looking at field data and not lab data, you might just have a bunch of like super modern devices, and you might have just like a slow site could price out a bunch of slower, like old Androids. So
Yeah, we got two comments in chat. Trout Soda, I think now .sh was perf orientated, but the move to Vercel not so much. Was now what was now sh? It sounds familiar. I've forgotten now.
Yeah, I don't really remember that one. I know Vercel used to be called Zeit. But now SH sounds familiar. I just don't.
Yeah,
I don't
Trout Soda,
remember
maybe you can fill us in. And then we got David Dodds.
David Dodds.
I'm sure if I missed it, but what's the description of INP? From what I can tell, many JS-driven websites are going to have a hard time getting around this.
So there's a bunch of different blog posts about it. There is one on web.dev, which is pretty good, and it kind of goes through like what an interaction is if you want to get the real details of it. But I think just the high level differences are FID is the first input delay, and interaction to next paint is the sort of worst case measurement. So it sort of looks at the whole life cycle of your page and finds the worst interaction, and then that's your score. So it's first versus worst, I guess is maybe the marketing way to say it.
How does that work with lazy loading? Like, is it going through every component on the page and loading all the lazy loaded components?
Well, that's why it's field data, right? It's actual interactions from
I see.
INP is only a field data thing. So it's if a user isn't interacting with a very slow piece of your site, you could have like 10 megabyte of JavaScript lazy loading in this like menu, but if no one ever goes to it, then it isn't going to show up in your field data. And that's just kind of I feel like the two levers that are being pulled right now is field data versus lab data. And I actually wrote a blog post about this a while back. If you go to my site, there's like what was it? Lighthouse. Yeah, the Art of Deception Lighthouse Score Edition. I kind of go through these like different ways to sort of cheat at Lighthouse scores. And there's a section at the bottom about lab data versus field data. So if folks want to read more about that, I sort of talk about the nefarious ways that people manipulate these things. So just additional reading if you'd like.
Nice.
So that's kind of what's happening. Next week, there's a bunch of different blog posts that people have written about it. You can kind of see there's one on Vercel, and they're very good blog posts. And just a bunch of additional reading. I think maybe the next, I don't know, did we have any more comments or questions about that?
Zet's product was now a serverless offering, then came Vercel and they spun that down. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So it was a Zeit, Zeit. Um, it was part of Zeit before they renamed.
Mm.
Yeah, it was purely serverless based. Yeah, I remember Vercel sort of playing around with the Jamstack branding for a while, and then they
Yeah.
decided,
Nope.
perhaps wisely, to go a different route because, yeah, it was more of a marketing thing they didn't want to help prop up. But
Yeah, it's amazing what a decision like that, like the ramifications of that. Like in a parallel universe, it'd be interesting to see if they just fully embraced it. I wonder what that would look
yeah, I
like.
mean that's almost a great transition to the to the next
Yeah,
topic and
it's true.
the panel because yeah, I think yesterday's panel went great. How did you feel it went?
Yeah, it was really interesting. It's I love this, like developing this idea with like multiple panels and multiple people, and it just evolves at each stage. Um, and you don't quite know exactly where it's going to go, but I feel like everyone's generally in the same camp, which is what Jamstack is. But it's
Mhm.
just trying to figure out like what's that core thing and being able to describe that really, really well. That's the hard bit, and it's
Yeah.
fascinating seeing everyone's take on it.
Yeah, I thought that the discussion about sort of the on-ramp for new developers was a great piece of it because it also helps inform like the minimum viable Jamstack project and maybe some of these sort of gray areas that exist around the edges of this thing. But
Mm,
I do kind of just go back to that that Vercel thing we were just talking about how they originally started as like serverless first and sort of the anti Jamstack and um, they sort of dipped their toes into Jamstack and I feel like they are in some ways abusing Jamstack a little bit because when you look at some of the communications around the portability of Next.js, a lot of that discussion is static export of Next.js sites.
yeah,
um, and
it's
you
like just
can
kind of
very,
glossing over that.
yeah, you can very easily see the sort of the, I don't know, the wiggle room that they are trying to have around the framework's portability and sort of vendor lock-in because they want vendor lock-in, right? Um, but then Jamstack is then the escape hatch at which they so yeah, they're pulling a bunch of different levers and they have a bunch of tension in their own communications too. So but yeah, I mean just maybe back to the panel, I thought that just that point around folks just starting out um, and what's the easiest way to get them building for the web, Jamstack or not? I thought was a great way to frame the discussion. I don't remember who brought that up. I thought maybe it was Stephanie, but
I think so. Stephanie had awesome quotes, like talking
yeah.
about what was it, like bare metal browser, like that. I thought that was a really strong like way of talking about it. And, and it highlights like what's kind of been lost and stretched with a lot of Jamstack and what was really good about it in the early days.
Yeah, and it did kind of I guess yesterday's stream felt like more of a not necessarily like a disconnect, but it did feel like there was more varied perspectives from
Mm-hmm.
the first panel in that yeah, I think that there was a lot more maybe pushback about the definition of the term and whether or not we even needed hard lines around the definition of the term. But
Mm. Yeah,
yeah,
it's like it's a constant it's a tension, right? Like trying to make it useful and not too constrictive. But then on the other end, if you make it so wide and Jamstack is everything because we want to handle all use cases, it's not you can just talk about web development or modern web development. That you don't need a term or it's hard to create a more focused community around that idea. Yeah, but exactly where and how you draw that line, it's hard. That's what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Just going back to that Vercel point is, um, Vercel was they originally sort of played around with Jamstack branding. I remember them. I remember seeing Jamstack on their website, but their roots were like this serverless first platform, and then Jamstack almost pivoted to include. So Vercel pivoted away from Jamstack, and Jamstack then tried to pivot to include Next.js and
Yeah.
Vercel. So there's I think a lot of maneuvering that happened around the definition of the term, and I guess I will continue to have the opinion that Next.js as a serverless first product is not a Jamstack product, and I don't think that Remix is a Jamstack product, and that's fine. I don't know why those need to be. I don't think they would even care to be classified as outside the Jamstack umbrella. But if you draw that line, it then becomes a thing that you can educate people on.
I was trying to think of an analogy, and this isn't a good one, but I'm going to say it anyway. I don't know if you played Pokemon growing up, but everyone has their favorite Pokemon, right? Pokemon's more nostalgia for me. I don't really play it anymore. My favorite Pokemon is Mr. Mime. And if I want to find like-minded Mr. Mimers, I could go to like an anime conference or like Comic-Con or something like that. And there'd be tons of people there. And maybe I could find some other people that are into Pokemon there. And then I could ask them, what's your favorite Pokemon? Mine's Bulbasaur and mine's Mr. Mime. Take it a step back, a step forward, more niche. I go to a Pokemon conference. And now I don't need to find the other Pokemon people. I can assume everyone is into Pokemon. And I can just have that conversation straight away. What's your favorite Pokemon? And I might find someone else who says Mr. Mime, and we can be like, yeah, that Mr. Mime's awesome, mate. But then you make it even more niche, and it's a Mr. Mime meetup. And I go there, and everyone is like, Mr. Mime is the greatest. How tall do you think he is? Don't you think he'd be a cool friend? And like every person there, I know I'm going to have so much in common with and be able to talk about Mr. Mime with. And I think that's like bringing that into Jamstack. I think that's why it's really important to shrink it down, is because then you get these more concentrated conversations about the like core thing that everyone's interested in. Whereas if you make it really wide, now you've got people talking about building super complex applications with these frameworks and someone building a personal blog with a static website. And those two people are using completely different tool sets and are thinking about building for the web in completely different ways. Does that analogy work?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I feel like there's definitely diminishing returns when you specialize beyond a certain point, but yeah, I would rather have more shared values with the folks that I'm congregating with and talking with about how to build for the web than not. I feel like if once you lose some of those core shared values, then it's hard to, I guess, find, I don't know, excitement, and it's hard to get excited about the things you're doing, because you can kind of see it in like the web components community too. Like I'm super passionate about web components. I like zero dependency web components. And so it almost becomes a personal decision, like where do I draw the line in my advocacy of web components, because I prefer zero dependency web components that are tiny and use sort of light DOM whenever possible, like the HTML web component movement. But I'll still like share things that are in the web component sphere, like lit and stencil, and I'm still rooting for all of these sort of distinct communities that are trying to propel web components forward. But you can also just see, like, in the React community, they don't care about they don't care about web components at all.
Yeah.
And
'Cause-
that sort of goes all the way to the top. And yeah, I think that a lot of even the project maintainers don't really care
mean,
too much about web components. But
yeah, it's a paradigm where it's not important. And
yeah, but at the same time, we have all these different hats that we wear, right? Like sometimes I wear my web development hat and I'm rooting for the future of web development generally. I don't necessarily put that one on too much on social media, but I still like am very passionate about web versus like building native apps and apps in the app store. So like it's almost this spectrum that I have to choose, like where I segment my time and my almost my passion in a way. Because I would still root for React over an iOS native app. Like that's just still a thing that I think is healthier for the web generally. Because I don't want to be a native app developer. There's like yeah, I just don't think that that has as much long-term value because that code like churns way quicker than
yeah,
stuff on the web.
yeah.
And I'm less
We got,
interested in it.
we got a comment from Bob Mansour. Welcome.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah, Bob's number one fan. I think he's here each week. It seems there's
Yeah.
a distinction between building applications versus building websites and React-based frameworks versus Jamstack frameworks. Does that make sense? Yeah, I agree. And it's like that's the problem with Jamstack, and it's trying to put a tent and make the tent as large as possible because then you have the most people in the community, which I just don't think is the right metric. Like size of community isn't a good metric. It should be
Right.
it should be like how valuable and how like passionate are people in that community. That's a sign of a better community, at least to me, that I want to be a part of.
Yeah, and I think that starting with sort of values first, I think is a better way to, I don't know, get people involved and get people passionate about it and get people excited to like build for the web, because that's really what it's about, right? We want people to be excited to build for the platform that we're also building for. Um, because I mean, there are certain tech stacks that I would not be excited to work on, and I would not be excited to go to work and work on. And I would love for those to be as minimal impact on web development as possible. But a lot of that just comes back to we got to like cheerlead for the things that are good and cheerlead for the things that we think are a better direction forward. And so, yeah, I don't know if I am totally on board. I feel like I've had a real hard time with that dichotomy of sites versus apps.
Yeah,
And
because it's not like a hard switch between them as well. That's what makes it difficult. There's a lot of gray in there.
yeah, I feel like it was sort of used as a cudgel for a very long time to like excuse the single page application first mentality. Because we're building apps, right? We need this complex tech stack to build apps. And I think that there are a whole bunch of alternatives now that are more popular that debunked that original original mentality and that original claim. And yeah, it's nice to see those sort of the pendulum swinging back the other way. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I'm sort of like of the mindset that you start with HTML and you can make a site or an app, or you can even make half site, half app um, project as well. I mean, it almost comes down to, and I think that Islands architecture highlights this quite a bit, is that you're almost making that decision on a per component basis, like a per section of your page basis. Is this part of my site going to be more app? Is it going to be more site? And then you start to see why that kind of breaks down, because why do we need to make that distinction? What is that distinction buying us? It's
Mm.
buying us maybe some different expectations about um, the user experience. Is it though? I don't think so. Like, people have expectations about the web generally. And they open their web browser, they go to websites, and those expectations are always changing because of the UX of the products that people interact with. Um, and yeah, expectations are growing, but uh, that doesn't mean that a site can't have a nice interaction model like a classical app might also. So
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
like
I have a hard time with that.
the user doesn't make that distinction, right? They're just like, I'm going
Right.
to a website.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm going to a web app, and so I expect it to have a loading screen and be a bit slower.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I posted some snarky social media posts back in the day about how an app is just like a slower website. um,
We got a
but
big
yeah.
one from Bob. It's funny to see Remix say on their homepage, Remix is a full stack web framework that lets you focus on the user interface and work back through the web standards to deliver a fast, slick, and resilient user experience. As Steph said yesterday, the fundamentals, i.e., the web standards of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, make up bare metal of the browser. Remix says they work backwards, whatever that means. Yeah, I think that's it. It's like I think a lot of it is just trying to commercialize, like add some sort of compute in there so you can charge for it. When in many use cases is not necessary. It's not that those like serverless or server side rendering isn't a good tool. I just think it's often used in places it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, that is sort of an interesting point to make, especially in the static versus dynamic discussion. Because I do feel like, even just going back to sort of the islands model of uh, different architecture for different components on your site, it seems like a lot of blogs nowadays, you can add like a contact form or a subscription form to the end of it, and that requires some form processing. Um, and you can implement that with a variety of different methods, but that requires at least some dynamic piece to exist to process a
Yeah.
form. Um, and that's sort of, for me, when you start to get out of the Jamstack realm, but you can still stay in the Jamstack realm and use. That's maybe the weird tension with capitalism that exists in the Jamstack world, is that I feel like I will use a form processor service, like suffer as a service, like form processor uh, thing, and I'll pay for someone to do that. It's just so they can manage all the complexity of that server side stuff. And I see the economic benefit in sort of farming that out to somewhere else, and then I can keep my tech stack completely static and just have a third party dependency for that piece.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it's almost like you can see the tension, right? More people want to reduce these third party dependencies, and I'm also a fan of that as well. But uh, it's this hard line that exists, or this weird gray area that exists. I know those are two completely opposite things that I just said, but I meant to say gray area. um, that exists where are trying to bring as much as you can in-house to reduce your external churn, but there's a trade-off that you make, right, where you sacrifice some of your technical architecture, or the simplicity of your technical architecture when you do that. So I don't know. I think that Remix occupies a very interesting space. Again, I don't think they're Jamstack, but I think that they are trying to do the right thing in the sphere of the React constraints in which they live. I wish that they would go more towards the Astro approach of Zero.js by default, and then it would be easier to cheerlead for them. But I do think they're trying to do the right thing in terms of trying to move back towards web standards and back towards a simpler model of things. But I don't know. Interesting marketing copy for sure.
Yeah, it is. We got David Downs. Hypothetical question: would JS frameworks exist if ES6 arrived before them?
That is such a good question. Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot, and I think that for me, it goes back to, like, when you think about Chris Coyer's Great Divide article, sort of pitching the difference in expectations of job roles between sort of front end and these more back-endy job roles that exist. I think that it's, for me, the divide started it started with Webpack. It wasn't necessarily, it didn't start with React. For me, it started with complex build tools that were not user-friendly at all. And it priced out a bunch of people that didn't want to put up with that. They didn't want that complexity in their tech stack. They didn't want the extra weight that came down to that came with that, using that product. And React needed a bundler in that way. So React and Webpack's like origins, I feel like, were intertwined. But for me, like, if React had an easier bundler experience to make server-side rendering, I don't know, maybe a more approachable thing, I feel like the web would be a lot different now, in a good way. Not necessarily that React would be less popular. I think it would be more popular because it would have satisfied more camps of developer. Even though it sort of started with the single page application roots, they did have like server-side rendering APIs very early on, but no one used those. And yeah, I think that the sort of intertwining with React, or with Webpack, excuse me, was the start of the bifurcation. And so, to just trying to get back to his original question, I do think frameworks would have existed, and this complexity would have existed even with ES6, because bundling is just going to be part of the game. I don't think HTTP2 solves the problem. I don't think import maps solve the problem. You're always going to have this like next tier of bundling that you need for a site. But yeah, I don't feel like Webpack was it, even though the Webpack folks are still going strong and making new versions of Webpack and renaming them to different things. And yeah, they're still getting paid to work on bundlers, which is, I don't know, that's makes me question meritocracy a little bit, but we don't need to go into that. Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but yeah, I don't think that the syntax of ES6 would have changed anything. It certainly would have reduced the popularity of Babel and the transpilers, but yeah.
So let's bring it back to the panel. What do you think? What do you? Let's put my headphones out. I think we got to an interesting point at the end where we were talking about what the community is, and there was kind of two paths. One was is this a community? Is this like a static site fan club? Static site fan club?
I love that
Or
name.
is it, yeah, I think no matter what, I'm gonna get swag made with Static Site Fan Club. Or is it a philosophy about static first? Which, yeah, I feel like those are like the two paths we could go down. Yeah, what's your feelings on that, Zach?
Yeah, I think static first is a very strong term, because it sort of leaves the door open to these adjacent pieces that I feel like are useful. Um, like even in the 11econf website that we talked about in the last session or 2 sessions ago, 2 episodes ago. Yeah, there's dynamic pieces, and we use sort of these serverless functions to do that. And that's still a static first site because all the content on the site is just static before you do the registration piece. So yeah, I almost like the idea of, again, it comes back to like a project. Not only does a project need to be static only or serverless only, that we can get down to like individual routes can be static first,
Yeah.
and we can divide them up in that way. But not just that, individual like pieces of your page can be serverless or static. I would like to be able to draw the line even at that level.
Interesting.
But I don't know if we're gonna get there, because I feel like just architecturally, I think a lot of edge processing and edge network stuff that like the APIs people are exposing to do edge modifications to your sites now require you to sort of go all in on that. And yeah, I don't know if they're going to expose APIs to do that, but it would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I just had an interview with US before this, and one of his, I put this question to him, and I really liked his take on I put Jamstack as a term, pre-baked or static first. And his answer was, it's about the people more than the term. Like, that's the thing I really care about, which, yeah, that's it. It's good to remember that for sure. And then he said, with static first, it really resonates with him, but he's worried about static just being a a term that's just like negative in general, or just perceived as limited. Yeah, and that's one thing he liked about Jamstack, is it's like kind of fun and whimsical, and it's more playful. I like go in circles around all three of them. I like
Yeah.
all of them for different reasons. It's Yeah, it's just tough to um yeah, to really know which is the right one. They each have big pros and big cons.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the sort of baggage of static as a word, I it's it feels like hearsay, right? um, because all the people that sort of talk about having trouble communicating Jamstack to stakeholders are discussions that I haven't had personally, and
Yeah.
they're discussions that I would counter with the security and complexity constraints of dynamic
Yeah. I feel like
architectures. So
you don't even need to say static if you're talking to non-technical stakeholders. Like, just
yeah,
I'm
because
gonna
they're not
build
going to
you
know
a
what
website.
Jamstack is either.
Yeah, I'm gonna build you a website that's really fast and secure and scales easily, and it's gonna last you a long time. Oh, that sounds great. Like, I feel like they're not going to be. What's that? What architecture type is that called? You're like,
Yeah,
oh,
it's
it's called static.
yeah. I mean, I feel like the counter argument to that is folks that are subscribed to their Gartner Magic Quadrants and
Yeah,
get all of their
that's
maybe
true.
the higher level C-suite of these technical companies that love the buzzwords, and they ask all their developers if we're using the right buzzwords. um, so yeah, I think that I'm with you that I'm completely on board with keeping the terms to what they mean and using the terms that folks understand.
Yeah, because
Um,
that's I feel like that's one of the topics we really need to nail is like who. Because if the who is the people who read Gartner and want the buzzwords, like, okay, that clearly need hype and buzz and things like that. But is that really the people we're trying to have in this community who are going to be passionate about static sites and contribute and talk about it and do talks about it? Like, yeah.
yeah, yeah, I'm kind of with you that I understand that there's drawbacks to static. Like those are valid points to be made, and we can communicate those. That's to me, it's the same sort of discussion that we're having with Jamstack, right? Too that there's baggage, but if we're clear about what it is and what it isn't, and we're honest about what it can do and what it shouldn't be used to do,
Mm,
then that baggage is a strength. Um, because you know that it's bad for this, but it's the reason it's bad for that is because it's good for this. That it doesn't
yeah.
have these dynamic pieces that have security issues, and especially with the Node ecosystem, I feel like it's package managers having uh, supply chain issues with your dependencies and all kinds of things that can go wrong. It's and you can see that sort of come to light if you look at the Next.js code base too. They have basically like mainlined all of their dependencies. um, and sort of opted out of using npm for things as much as possible. And I don't know. I that's one approach that you can take, but I would rather manage it a little bit differently to get the power of npm. Like if someone contributes a fix and they're an npm package, I want everyone that's using that package to get it as quickly as possible, not waiting for me to issue a release that has that minor update with the
Mm.
security fix. Um, so yeah, there's a whole bunch of drawbacks to doing it that way too, but I feel like I'm getting off track.
Let's talk web components. Got like 7 minutes.
Yeah, I have so many tabs open with awesome web components right now. And I would love to just like go through them and give a little shout out to all these creators that have made these awesome web components. I think that you're going to see a lot of Cloud4 today. Cloud4 have been doing this sort of HTML first web components for a long time. You can go to cloud4.com. Don't need my Firefox toolbar to show up here. Cloud4.com, and there's a bunch of different blog posts they have out here. And I love just this one, elastic text area. I feel like this is just like the classic problem of expanding a text area to its content automatically.
Hmm.
And you can have just a
Wow.
very simple web component that does that. And it uses progressive enhancement too, because it just looks for text areas inside this elastic text area, and you're good to go. Um, and I think that was sort of one of the early HTML web components that was introduced,
Mm,
and it's great. I think
that's
another
cool.
sort of classic one is this image comparison. You'll see these a lot, comparing two different images like a diff. And it has like a slider in the middle. And this is what the markup looks for. It looks for this image comparison web component. Yeah. So if JavaScript is disabled or before JavaScript is available, it will show these two fallback images. And then, yeah, it will stack them and give you a little slider after JavaScript loads. So I think that is awesome. That's great. Tiny little 1.5 kilobyte web component. And you can kind of see like where this is going, right? You have like these script files that are just single component based scripts. And if you sort of opt out of this bundler mentality of needing everything up front, you do have a lot of sort of control over where the script loads. You can lazy load it. You can do all kinds of things with it and sort of load it on demand. Yeah, and you could even do that. I have a web component called island, which is like islands architecture for web components. Other frameworks too, but yeah, you could put this inside of an island and lazy load it based on a bunch of different conditions too. And that will load it or initialize it only when it's visible or a variety of other things. So yeah, I think that there's always that tension, right? Again, coming back to the bundler discussion, but I think web components is really a fresh start and going to allow us a lot more power. I also have this sort of progressive enhancement recipes and WebC. It solves the same problem. I won't go through it too much, but it solves the same problem of this like image slider. And it really tries to get into the question of how the component renders pre and post JavaScript. So on these examples, you can see just side by side, this one is without JavaScript. You can see that the interactivity doesn't do anything. But there's also no content layout shift. There's no layout shift that happens because the left and the right use the same dimensions and the same form components are available. And you can kind of see there's 7 different approaches here for pre and post JavaScript and how to implement those in WebC. There's even one that works without JavaScript.
Wow.
Using radio buttons and the has trick. I don't think that one maybe has the best accessibility, but yeah, that's maybe for a different day, a discussion about JavaScript and accessibility. But yeah, just mentioning that one because we talked about image comparisons. I think Jim Nielsen had a good example of an HTML web component that added a little tooltip to an avatar just to show the person's name. I don't know if there's a demo on this page or not, but he kind of goes through the blog post of how to implement that, and I think it's very informative. I think one of the web components that a lot of people are already know about, or maybe one of the famous first web components that a lot of folks knew about, was this Google Model Viewer. It takes a 3D model and it lets you interact with it. And I think, yeah, it's very cool capability for the web just generally to have 3D stuff embedded right in your, you can kind of see I'm dragging it around right in your web page. I think the drawback to this one is that it's pretty hefty. Yeah, these 3D models are expensive, but also the JavaScript for this one is pretty hefty as well. So I think it's like, yeah, 62 kilobyte. So again, going back to Cloud 4, I don't know why I want to say Cloud Floor. Cloud 4. Yeah, they made sort of a light version of it that will lazy load it when you interact with the model. And here's a demo of that. And you can kind of see until you click on it, it won't, it's like a static image. And then, yeah, it just gives you a little bit more control over the loading and network performance of that.
So just going back to INP there, how would something like that be like rated for INP? I guess it's if the users are clicking it, it will be included, or if they're not clicking it, some sort of average of that.
Yeah, I think if you go back to this blog post, you can kind of see the individual breakdown of what an interaction is. And so it kind of goes from when the user actually clicks, and you can see this input delay between when the user clicks and when that first JavaScript event fires. That was maybe another big difference between first input delay and input to next paint. Because interaction to next paint, excuse me, is the input delay all the way to the next frame rendering. So yeah, it's quite a bit. It's quite a bit of because it also takes your event handlers into account. So it's measuring quite a bit more, and that's why you need to be more careful about what you're putting into your event handler processing, because all of that counts in your score.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think I only have 2 left. I had this little lazy loading. Originally, I had this dumpster on the 11dconf website, and that was using a similar approach with Model Viewer. You gotta love the rotating dumpster. Shout out to that. Oh, I created this one. This one doesn't have a demo, so yeah, we'll skip this one for now. I don't see a demo link here, but another one that says like a shader art, which I thought was, oh, here we go. CodePen. If it loads, I don't know if it's beefy or. All right, well, I'm sure I'll come back to that one later and it will work. But
shading a black screen.
I don't think so. I wonder if it's a Firefox issue. I don't know. Let's look. I don't see any issues. I don't see any 404s. Yeah. Oh well. Bailing. We're bailing on that one. I'm sure it will work later. I remember it working at some point. So yeah, that's maybe I don't know, maybe I went through like 6 or 7 web components. But I would love to highlight more web components in this stream, and if folks have ones that they want to see highlighted, definitely share them with us and we'll go through them.
Yeah, no, you've got me on the web component train. It's like just having a couple of kilobytes of JavaScript to have all that functionality, and just being able to drop that in and have it made for you. It's super powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you hear a lot of discussion around in these like heavy JavaScript framework world of like tree shaking, but it's hard to beat like a single component script file that is tree shook down to its core.
Yeah.
And having full control of that without even using a bundler at all. That's the essence of tree shaking. So yeah, I don't know. I'm on the web components train, and we're leaving the station. Choo choo.
Oh yeah. All right, let's end the Static Chronicles static site web happy hour talking about static sites with Zach and Mike session. Let's leave it there. See you again next week. Thanks, team.
Thanks.